What's up guys, welcome back. In this video we're going to take a look at how I painted the wings on this Night Lord model. I wanted to create a natural flesh look to the wings, so to start off I used a bog standard flesh tone. This here is Vallejo Red Beige. Now we want to play about with the look by adding some subtle colour filters at the end. So in order to make those stand out more, we'll desaturate this slightly by mixing in some Scale Colour Cantabric Blue. This is going to give us a much duller skin tone and we'll paint that over the fleshy parts of the wings. In order to get a smooth coverage, we'll do this over a couple of layers, letting each layer dry before we apply a new one. I'm also using quite a large brush for this. This one here is actually a 5. And I'm using that for a couple of reasons. Firstly, so that we can cover a larger area with less effort. And secondly, it allows us to use less brush strokes to cover the whole surface. The less brush strokes that you use, the smoother your coverage will be. So if you're struggling to get a smooth base coat, try switching up to a larger brush size. Once that initial base coat is done, we're going to apply our first highlight. To achieve this, we'll be doing a wet blend between the red beige and our base colour. This is going to give us a subtle shift in the saturation of the colour and also help to lay down an initial boost in the brightness that we can build on as we go forward. To do a wet blend, you want the paint to be fairly thick so that it covers well, and also you want to keep using that large brush so that the paint isn't going to dry on the bristles. I'd also recommend having a second brush on hand in case you need to do some feathering. That way you won't need to clean your brush, you can just switch to the other one, it kind of saves you a bit of time. So like everything in miniature painting, there's a few ways that you can approach this. You can begin by covering the whole area you're trying to blend with your initial base colour like this. Then quickly wash your brush off and grab your highlight colour. While your base colour is still wet, apply the brighter colour directly over the top where you want the highlight to be. In our case, that's going to be at the top of the curved part of the wing segment. Now you can switch to your second brush and use that to blend the edges of the two colours, simply by drawing the two colours into each other just at the edge of where the two meet. So as the two paints are still wet, they will mix on the surface, forming a hopefully smooth transition. A more conventional approach is to still use two brushes but load up one with your base colour and one with your highlight. Then starting on one side, paint your base colour into the darker part of the wing. And while that's still wet, switch to your other brush and paint your highlight onto the upper part of the wing like so. Then you're going to quickly wipe most of the paint off the brush and using a back and forth motion, draw the edge of the highlight into the still wet base colour, moving the two paints into each other, allowing them to mix on the surface. Again, while the highlight is still wet, you're going to grab your other brush that has your base colour on it and you're going to do the same thing, but this time on the other side of the highlight. You can keep going back and forth, applying more of your highlight and your base colour until you're happy with the blend. Just be careful that you don't linger too long on the same area, or the paint is going to begin to dry slightly and you'll end up getting some horrible surface textures building up. Alright, so I just used the same sort of idea for the rest of the wing segments. First applying one of the colours, then quickly grabbing the second colour and essentially mixing the two directly on the surface of the wing in order to get a blend. If you're not happy with the result, you can simply repeat the process once it's dry. For example, this one at the end is a bit weak, so we'll repeat the wet blend a second time. There's usually a fair amount of going back and forth involved when you're using this technique. It's rare that you're going to nail it straight away, but you have a fair amount of wiggle room to play about with the paint before you need to stop and let it dry. Just don't panic if it doesn't work out how you were expecting. All you need to do is let it dry and try again. Alright, so now that we've created a quick initial highlight, we'll start to build up the brightness and also add in some texture. To do that, we'll mix some Scale Colour White Sands into the red beige, making it a bit lighter, and we'll start to paint this on as little lines running over the length of each wing segment. trying to keep most of the lines around the peak of that rounded surface. This is going to help to create some subtle surface texture on the wings to give a more organic effect. The colour is going to appear pretty dull throughout this highlighting section, but we'll be adding some colour filters later on, and that's going to help us get a more lifelike appearance. Mix a bit more white sands into the highlight and we'll continue painting on our texture lines. I think I would have preferred it if the wings didn't have these little cuts sculpted into them. I should probably have filled them in when I was prepping it, but the final result came out looking quite good, so it ended up not being such a big deal. If you try this out, you'll notice that the white sands actually starts to matte down the paint as you go along. That's one of the things that I like about scale colour. You can get some interesting effects if you start with a more satin paint and then work some scale colour into the highlights to matte them down. It's definitely something that's worth playing about with. Add some more white sands and keep applying your highlight lines. Try to build up the brightness around the middle of the wings. You can also add some little lines towards the bottom edge of the wings, just to make it look as if they're getting all frayed with age. This probably sounds a bit pretentious, but try and use the texture that's already there to help guide you in where to place your highlights. Let the model tell you where to put your brush strokes rather than the other way around. What I mean by that is actually look at the surface that you're working on and you'll be able to see little areas of details that look interesting, the other parts that you want to try and emphasise with a highlight or two. Try not to get into the mindset of, okay, now I apply my second highlight, and now I apply my third highlight. It's really easy to end up painting blindly, just slapping the paint on and hoping for the best. Don't let yourself fall into that trap. It sounds silly, but actually look at what you're doing. Study the surfaces and let your previous layers guide you in placing your current ones.
We need emotional content. Don't think. Feel. It is like a finger pointing away to the moon. Don't concentrate on the finger or you will miss all that heavenly glory.
Alright, so now that we've built the highlights up and added some texture, we'll move on to putting in some colour variation. For that we'll use some scale colour black leather, which if you remember was the original base colour for the Night Lord armour. And we'll thin this down to a glaze with a bit of water. Now we're going to pull this into the darker parts of each wing segment. Just by drawing the brush over the surface, moving it in the direction of the shadow. Then you can use a second damp brush to feather the edges out. And you do that by placing the brush into the edges of your glaze and then using a constant back and forth motion, slowly move the brush away from the glaze. The glaze is going to mix with the moisture in the brush and get thinner and thinner as you draw the brush across the surface. So that stops you from getting any stains at the edges once it dries. You can see it's a pretty subtle effect, but we'll do this over a couple of layers to build up the intensity of the colour. We don't want to make it too obvious though, so try not to go overboard. Unless of course you want a more obvious shift in colour, in that case just fill your boots. Just do as many layers as you like until you're happy with the effect. We'll make another glaze now, this time with some scale colour fuchsia, which we'll thin down with a little bit of water. I used this pink when I was painting the engine, so we'll use it again here to create a subtle OSL effect. Simply by pulling the glaze down over the wings, just in that area next to the engine of the backpack. Again, you can use a second brush to feather out the edges of the glaze with that back and forth action, just so that you don't get a horrible stain when it dries. I'll apply this over a couple of layers until I like the effect. Again, I want this to be fairly subtle. I'm assuming the model is in daylight, so there wouldn't be a huge lighting effect on the wings. But it's a nice idea to add in some subtle effects like this whenever the opportunity presents itself. Yep, I think that looks okay now. To continue, we'll create another glaze, this time with some purple ink. This one here is from Scale Colour, but you can use any purple ink you like. If you don't have an ink, just use a purple paint that has a bit of a satin or glossy finish to it. Again, we're going to thin this down with some water so that we have a lot of control over the intensity of the colour. And with a small amount on the brush, I'm going to glaze over the surface of each wing segment. This creates a subtle colour filtering effect where we are essentially tinting the whole thing slightly purple. Notice I've also swapped back to that larger brush so that I can cover a bigger area with less brush strokes. You can also see that I've blocked in the fingers of the wings, but don't worry, I'll explain that later on. Blocking those in at this stage just helps to give a better idea of what the wing is actually going to look like when it's finished. So just continue applying the glaze over the wing segments. Be careful not to allow any pooling on the surface. And as usual, I'm going to apply this over a few layers until I'm happy with the effect. Alright, so that's the fleshy parts of the wings finished. We can move on to the fingers now. We're going to paint these with a fleshy pink colour, and to get that we're going to mix in some of our fuchsia into the red beige. That gives us this nice pink tone, but we don't want to use that just yet. First we need a shadow colour. So we're going to take some of that fleshy pink and mix in some of our cantabric blue. That will give us this really dark desaturated tone, and we'll use that as our base colour. So just like we did with the wings, our first goal is to increase the saturation. So we're going to go from this dark base tone to this brighter pink colour, and then we'll build up the brightness from that point. To do that, we're going to thin the pink down with a bit of water to something around a heavy glaze to a light layer consistency. Thin enough that it has some transparency to it, but not so thin that it's going to take multiple layers before you notice anything happening. And we'll pull this over the upper part of the muscles and the weird fingers and stuff. You can see it doesn't totally cover the surface. Some of that base colour shines through underneath. And that's what we're looking for, so that you can create a natural transition just by applying a couple more layers. Pulling the paint across the surface towards the areas where you want the colour to be more intense. So at the top of the muscles or towards the ends of the elbow here. I guess that's an elbow anyway. So you're not mixing loads of in-between colours to do this, you're just letting the transparency of the paint create your in-between colours for you. We'll do the same on these finger elements, except on those you want the colour to be more intense towards the middle of each joint of the finger, around here. We're going to paint the knuckle part dark later on. I had to look at some reference pictures of bat wings and I found that you often get a darker area around the knuckles, so we might as well try and emulate that on the model. It's always a good idea to have a look at reference pictures from real life, especially if you're not quite sure how to go about painting something. They'll often give you ideas that you might not have thought of yourself. We'll use that same idea on the front edge here, just pulling the thin paint over the surface to create a transition over a few layers. We'll be adding quite a lot of texture to this part of the wing, so don't worry too much about getting it 100% smooth. Do this over a few layers until your highlight is opaque and you have that nice pink colour clearly defined. I'm just going to show this on one of the wings so that the video doesn't stretch on too long. I don't want you getting bored. Once you're happy with the look, mix a bit of white sands into the pinky flesh tone to lighten it, and we'll start adding in our higher level highlights. So just like we did on the wings, we'll build up the highlights gradually by mixing a bit more white sands in each time we apply a new layer, gradually adding in more detail as we increase the brightness of the colour. I'm going to treat this arm just like I would a normal arm you'd find on any figure. Pulling the paint up and over the muscles so that it comes to rest in the spots that would catch the most light. Here on these longer finger things, we'll pull the paint into the middle of each of these little segments. So I just pull it up from one side into the middle and then pull it up from the other side so that most of the paint ends up in the centre. If you use thin paint and don't have much on the brush, you can actually use it a lot like a soft leaded pencil. With a pencil you can lightly draw it over the surface of the paper and it's going to make a faint mark. Or you can press down hard and it will make a more obvious mark. Or you can build up several light marks one on top of the other in order to get a more solid coverage. When I get into a nice rhythm while painting, I tend to feel like I'm drawing on the model rather than painting it. I'm not really worrying or thinking about this or that technique. I'm just building up the detail and the colours by pushing the paint around. So if you ever find that you're getting frustrated, try not to worry so much about the intricacies of each technique and just
kick the tree.
Okay, maybe don't kick the tree, but kick the model. Or paint the model. Fuck, I'm so bad at this. Anyway, add some more white sands into your mix and we'll keep building up the highlights. You can see I'm using a bit of stippling here. That's to build up some texture to get the illusion of an organic surface. If you're still on the fence about trying stippling, give it a go. Adding textures to a model is a great way of elevating them. Just look at the backpack for example, that's pretty much all texturing and it looks sick.
You like it? Oh yeah, it's good stuff, man.
I've talked about stippling before, but if you're new to the technique, all you're really doing is gently tapping the tip of the brush against the surface, leaving behind tiny little dots. And the key is to be gentle so that you keep the tip sharp. If you're a bit ham-fisted, the bristles will splay out and you'll leave a large sort of dollop of paint instead of a dot. So just ease up on the brush and use a light touch. Add some more white sands into the mix and keep building up the highlights, gradually adding in more detail as we increase the brightness of the colour. I'm going to treat this arm just like I would a normal arm you'd find on any figure. Do this over a few layers until your highlight is opaque. To do the knuckles, we'll mix a bit of black into the original base colour to get this really dark pink tone. And we'll also thin that down with a bit of water to get a heavy glaze consistency. Now with very little of the glaze on the brush, we'll pull it up to the middle of the knuckle from either side. And if you like, you can use another brush to feather out the edges of the glaze, just pulling the edges away to the sides. And we'll do that over a few layers until it starts to get nice and dark. And here you can see how it looks now that I've painted the other side to match. I think it's pretty cool. I haven't painted the front edge of one of the wings yet, so I'm going to do that now. All I'm doing is building up the highlight and texture in the same way we did on the arm and the fingers. We'll build up the highlights gradually by mixing a bit more white sands in each time we apply a new layer, gradually adding in more detail as we increase the brightness of the colour. You can see I'm using a bit of stippling here. That's to build up some texture to get the illusion of an organic surface. So you should be able to understand what's happening. All you're really doing is gently tapping the tip of the brush against the surface, leaving behind tiny little dots. Just ease up on the brush and use a light touch so that you keep the tip sharp. Alright guys, so that is how I painted these wings. I hope you found the process interesting. I'm sure you'll be able to find ways to apply some of these ideas in different situations. Thanks a lot for your support and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks again. Bye for now. If you try this out, you'll notice that the white sands... you'll notice that a car keeps going past the window every 2 seconds, making this impossible to film. To record. Idiot.